Chapter 8. In the evening, the steamboat went away, and the boats disappeared. The pirates returned to camp. They were proud of the trouble they were making. They caught fish, cooked supper, and ate it, and then began discussing what the people in the town were thinking and saying about them. Tom and Joe could not help thinking about certain persons at home who could be worried about them. The boys became unhappy, but no one was brave enough to talk about the possibility of returning to civilization. When Joe and Huck fell asleep, Tom got up quietly, on his knees, picked up 2 pieces of white bark. Then he wrote something on each of them, put one in his jacket pocket, and the other he put in Joe's hat. And he also put into the hat a few schoolboy treasures, among them a piece of chalk, a small ball, 3 fish hooks, and 1 marble. Then he went to the side of the island, which was closest to the land, and swam across the channel. Tom reached the land finally, and found a low place and got out of the water. He put his hand in his jacket pocket and found his piece of bark. Just before 10 o'clock, he came out into an open place opposite the town and saw the ferry. Tom knew that it would go up to town soon. Everything was quiet under the stars. He went down the bank, watching with all his eyes, swam a few yards, and got into the ferry unnoticed. Finally, the bell rang, and a voice gave the order to go. A minute or 2 later, the voyage began. Tom was lucky. It was the last trip that day. The ferry was empty, and at that time, no one checked the tickets. In 15 long minutes, the wheels stopped, and Tom left the ferry and swam to the bank. He landed 50 yards away, because he didn't want to meet someone. He ran along dark streets, and finally came to his aunt's back fence. He climbed over and looked in the window of the sitting room. There were Aunt Polly, Sid, and Joe Harper's mother talking. They were sitting near the bed, and the bed was between them and the door. Tom went to the door and quietly opened it. Then he decided he could get in the room on his knees. So he put his head through the door and moved towards the bed. "Why has the candle stopped burning?" said Aunt Polly. "That door is open, I think." "Why, of course it is. Strange things happen here all the time. Go and close it, Sid." Tom disappeared under the bed just in time. He lay breathing hard for some time, and then moved to a place where he could almost touch his aunt's foot. "As I was saying," said Aunt Polly, "he wasn't a bad boy, only irresponsible. He never did any harm, and had the biggest heart." And she began to cry. "Just like my Joe," said Mrs. Harper. "He was always unselfish and kind. And I whipped him for taking that cream, and now I remember that I threw it out myself because it was bad. I'll never see him again in this world. Never, never, never. Poor boy." And Mrs. Harper sobbed. "I hope Tom is better off where he is," said Sid. "He did some things." "Sid!" Tom felt that the old lady was angry with his brother, though he could not see it. "Not a word against my Tom, now that he's gone. Oh, Mrs. Harper, I don't know how to live without him. He was such a good boy, though he tormented my old heart." It was too much for the old lady, and she broke entirely down. Tom felt sorry for himself, too. He began to have a better opinion of himself than ever before. He was so much touched by his aunt's suffering that he wanted to get out from under the bed to her, but he managed to control himself and stayed under the bed. He went on listening, and soon he learned that someone had found an empty raft down the river, and so everybody thought the boys had drowned. The police would be looking for their bodies till Sunday, and if they didn't find them, the funeral would take place on Sunday morning. Mrs. Harper gave a sobbing good night and left. Tom had to keep still long after Aunt Polly went to bed, because she couldn't fall asleep for a long time, crying and turning over. But at last she was asleep, only moaning a little in her sleep. Tom got from under the bed and stood watching his aunt. His heart was full of pity for her. He took out his piece of bark and put it on the table near the candle. But then he changed his mind and put the bark in his pocket again. Then he bent over and kissed Aunt Polly on the cheek and left the house, closing the door behind him. He walked back to the ferry and waited there for the first trip back to his friends. He reached the island early in the morning and entered the woods. Then he sat down and took a long rest, trying to keep awake, and went to the bank of the river. There he had some rest again until the sun was up, and then he got into the water to cross the river. A little later he reached the camp and heard Joe say, "No, Huck, Tom will come back. He won't leave us. He knows that it would be bad for a pirate to do this, and Tom's too proud to stay there. I think he has a plan." "Well, the things are ours anyway, aren't they?" "Not yet, Huck. The note says they are ours if he is not back here to breakfast." "But he is!" shouted Tom dramatically, entering the camp. Soon the pirates had the breakfast of bacon and fish, and Tom told his friends about his adventures. They felt like heroes again. Then Tom hid himself away under the tree to sleep till noon, and the other pirates got ready to fish and explore the island. The next day, the boys continued to play and swim. When they were tired, they lay on the dry, hot sand, and then went swimming again. On Friday, Tom found himself writing Becky in the sand with his big toe. He destroyed the word and was angry with himself for his weakness. But he wrote it again. He could not help it. By the evening, all of them were homesick. Tom tried hard not to show it. He had a secret which he was not ready to tell. He said cheerfully, "I am sure there have been pirates on this island before, boys. We'll explore it again. They've hidden treasures here somewhere. We can find gold and silver." But none of the pirates liked the idea. Tom tried one or two other things, but nothing helped. Joe sat looking unhappy. Finally, he said, "Oh, boys, let's give it up. I want to go home. I feel lonely." "Oh, no, Joe, you'll feel better later," said Tom. "Just think of the fishing that's here." "I don't need fishing. I want to go home." "But, Joe, this is such a good place for swimming." "I don't even want to swim when there's nobody telling me that I can't. I want to go home. I want to see my mother." "Oh, baby, we'll let the baby go home to his mother, won't we, Huck?" "Poor thing, does he want to see his mother? And so he will. You like it here, don't you, Huck? We'll stay, won't we?" Huck said, "Yes." "I'll never speak to you again as long as I live," said Joe, rising. And he moved away and began to put on his clothes. "Go home if you want," said Tom. "They'll laugh at you." "Oh, you're a nice pirate." "Huck and I are not babies. We'll stay, won't we, Huck?" Let him go if he wants to." Joe packed his things and began walking to the bank of the river. Tom was worried. He looked at Huck. Huck dropped his eyes. Then he said, "I want to go too, Tom. It is so lonely here, and now it will be worse. Let's us go too, Tom." "I won't. You can all go if you want to. I plan to stay." "Tom, I will go. Think it over. We'll wait for you when we get to the bank." "Well, you'll wait long, that's all." Tom stood looking after Huck, who was going away. He hoped the boys would stop, but they walked slowly on. Tom made one final struggle with his pride, and then ran after his friends, shouting, "Wait! Wait, I want to tell you something." Joe and Huck stopped and turned around. When he got to where they were, he told them about his secret, and they liked it very much. So the boys came back and played again, talking all the time about Tom's wonderful plan. About midnight, the boys woke up, because a storm began. A few big raindrops fell on the leaves. "Quick, boys, go for the tent," cried Tom. They ran to the tent and stayed there till the storm was over. When they went back to camp, the trees were broken by the storm. Their beds were destroyed. The boys were cold and wet. They made a fire, ate their boiled ham, and after that, they sat by the fire, talking about their midnight adventure until morning, because there was not a dry spot to sleep on anywhere around. On Saturday morning, the boys went to the beach and lay down to sleep. Then they played Indians for a change and had much fun.